we continue to see that community grieve there. Casey Stiegel, thank you very much, reporting from Uvalde, Texas for us. Joining us now, Republican Congressman and Alabama Senate candidate Mo Brooks. Congressman, welcome and thank you for joining us here on Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Sandra.
So you heard just a moment ago there, Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas and some other Republican members of Congress have spoken out as well. They're suggesting that perhaps there could be some common ground found here on gun legislation in the wake of this most recent shooting. Would you support any changes, sir, to the current gun laws on the books?
Well, let's, for emphasis, understand what the Second Amendment is about. The Second Amendment is designed to help ensure that we, the citizenry, always have the right to take back our government should it become dictatorial. That was a great fear of the Founding Fathers, and quite frankly, it's a fear today. And as long as we enjoy uninfringed Second Amendment rights, then we don't really have to worry that much about the government ever becoming dictatorial. But the moment that we take from our citizenry our ability to take our government back is the moment that the ability of dictatorial forces increases to the point where perhaps they will try to implement a dictatorial government at the federal level. So I want to protect the Second Amendment right to bear arms. The amendment is very clear. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If there are proposals out there that guarantee the rights of the American people to freely exercise their Second Amendment right to bear and keep arms, then I'll consider them. But if you're talking about depriving people of their Second Amendment right to bear arms, well, first, it's unconstitutional. So you're going to have to address that with a constitutional amendment, and we'll see how Congress and the states react to that kind of measure. But second, it's not the proper way to go if you want to preserve our freedoms. And I say that having been the target of an assassination attempt on a baseball field in Virginia where 170 some odd bullets were fired over about a 7-minute period of time. So I've been in the middle of one of these things, and I was a primary target of the assassin where he had my name, my physical description in his pocket at the time he launched this attack. What we have to do is stop the motivation that causes these criminals, these horrific individuals, to do what they do.
I want to dig into that in just a moment, because you did say some things on that this week. But first, to the specific gun laws in your state, sir. The minimum age in your state to buy an AR-15 like the one the school shooter used in Uvalde is 18 years old. There's no waiting period between the time that a firearm is purchased and when it's actually turned over to the buyer. There's no license for the sale of ammunition. Gallup research does find that a majority of Americans, 52% of them, are in favor of stricter gun laws when it comes to the sale of firearms. So to the majority of Americans who feel that way, you say what?
Well, I suggest that the polling data that you have does not really reflect the opinions of the American people. I suspect that the people who were polled, by way of example, were not properly explained what the purpose of the Second Amendment right to bear arms is. And I'll use my own history as an example. There were many times when I went to school with a shotgun in my car. Why? Because I just got through duck hunting. There are other teenagers my age at that point in time that also brought their weapons to school, and they had been hunters too for whatever it is the hunting season was about. Now, back when I was growing up, we didn't have these mass killings, okay? They weren't there. They didn't occur. Or if they did, I certainly was not cognizant of them, and they were very, very, very rare, so rare that I cannot recall a single instance in which one of those things occurred during my youth. Today, they're much more common. What's the big difference between when I was growing up and today? The big difference is a decline in the moral values, a decline in the respect for human life. If we teach proper moral values, if we teach respect for human life, if we properly address mental health issues that may somehow or another be associated with all these things, then that is the way to fix the problem.
Okay, so to that point, this week you suggested just that, what you believe is behind the rising number of mass shootings in America. You said this: it reflects poorly on liberal policies that encourage out-of-wedlock childbirth, divorce, single-parent households, and amoral values that undermine respect for life. Mass killings that are common in America today were, as you just stated, when I grew up, a very rare thing. The way to prevent mass killings, you say, is to restore moral values. I'll dig into that more in just a second, but does that statement, sir, unfairly blame single-parent households in this country for the rise of mass shootings?
Absolutely not. It blames moral values decline in the United States of America, and there are a lot of factors that have contributed to our moral decline. By way of example, all the studies I've ever seen suggest that children who are raised with just one parent around, they don't do as well by the time they become adults. Why? Because it's almost impossible for a single parent to do the kind of job that two parents collectively can do. It's just a numbers game. And there are a lot of single parents that do an excellent job raising their kids, but they are super parents. And I thank them for the effort that they've put forth in producing children who later become responsible adults. But unfortunately, the data is very clear. Those single parent households, for whatever reason, end up resulting in children who are more likely to be on welfare, who are less likely to get the kind of grades you expect to get in school, who are more likely to be involved in drugs, and who unfortunately are more likely to be involved in criminal conduct. That's just the data.
So
now, that's not to say that all single parents do that, okay? That is not the data. We're talking about probabilities and tendencies, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% greater probability, that has an effect on society.
So restoring moral values, you're calling for glacial change there. People want to know what can be done today. Aren't you then making the case for red flag laws that could help these communities identify someone who owns a firearm, who doesn't have respect for human life? They have been adopted in 19 states, but not Alabama. Would you support that?
Under the United States Constitution, before you can do something to this kind of individual, you have to show, one, that their mind's off a little bit, and two, that they've engaged in some kind of conduct that would warrant you taking the appropriate kind of action against them, by way of example, to house them for their own protection or protection of others. It might be a non-compos mentis, mental capacity type of hearing. There are laws already on the books to take care of those types of issues. The problem is identifying them, and identifying them as opposed to the problem associated with misidentifying others. And there has to be a balance, and that's a real challenge for our probate courts around the country and every other governmental body or person who is responsible for determining when someone becomes a risk to themselves and to others. That's a very difficult thing to mind read.
So is it fair to say you could be, if it was written correctly, open to some sort of red flag law in your state?
I'm not talking about red flag laws. I'm talking about a person who is a danger to others that we already have laws for that are already on the books, okay? If you've got some kind of mental issue and you are a danger to yourself or a danger to others, then you already can be subject to court jurisdiction and the appropriate court remedies to ensure that you're no longer a danger to yourself and to others. That exists now. That's been on the books in Alabama for decades, and I believe it's been on the books throughout the country for decades.
Several speakers, meanwhile, sir, chose not to attend this week's NRA event in Texas, including Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. The NRA endorsed you recently. Do you believe it was appropriate to hold that meeting in Texas?
I'm not going to comment on the meeting in Texas because I'm not a part of it, but I very much appreciate that the National Rifle Association, Gun Owners of America, and the National Association of Gun Rights have endorsed me in this United States Senate race in Alabama over all other comers. That says a lot about who's going to actually fight to defend the Second Amendment right to bear arms, and in Alabama, that's a big deal.
All right, on to the Senate primary runoff and the former President Donald Trump. You're now in a runoff in the Alabama Senate primary against Katie Britt, who I should note we did invite to join us here today, but she was unavailable. All of this is happening after former President Trump decided to unendorse you, sir, saying you had blown it by going, quote, woke, for not talking about what he says was 2020 election fraud. What exactly did the president ask you to do after the 2020 election?
The president and I had many conversations between September 1st and his decision to unendorse me that revolved around his being reinstated, revolved around his wanting to rescind the election. And I can understand him wanting to do that, okay? He was robbed, in my judgment, in 2020. In his judgment, he was robbed. And so I can understand that desire. The conflict was when I would explain the law does not permit us to do that. Our one shot at reversing the election, our one shot in an election contest under the United States Constitution and federal law is on January 6th. That's it. That's the final appeal date. So anything we do after that has to focus on winning the 2022 and 2024 elections. We can use what happened in 2020 as a motivation to try to get better election laws to use as a motivation to win in 2022 and 2024 to save our country. But what is now done in 2020 is irreversible under the United States Constitution and the United States Code. And I'm one of those who believes in law and order. I might not like it that that's the end game, but that is the end game.
And just to go on the record, there has been still no evidence or proof provided that there was any sort of fraud in that.
Well, no, that's wrong. I don't know why you people in the media keep saying that, but that is absolutely false. That is absolutely false. You keep saying it every time, but that's absolutely false.
What is false, sir?
You had 150 congressmen and senators who absolutely disagreed with you on what you just said. So what are you calling them? What are you calling them when you say 150 Republican senators and congressmen looked at the voter fraud issue and said there was a major problem? What are you calling the Commission on Federal Election Reform, a bipartisan committee with Jimmy Carter on the one hand and James Baker, Ronald Reagan, White House Chief of Staff on the other, back in 2005, who analyzed the systemic weaknesses, the systemic flaws in our election system, and warned us that elections are going to be stolen if we don't fix these problems, and those problems were not fixed. Okay. So I don't know who's telling you there's no evidence, but that tells me you haven't done your homework. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
The courts and the judges that have
the courts. Wait, time out. Don't go into that. Don't go into that.
All right.
Don't go into that. The courts do not have the. Wait a minute. No. I'm getting in the last word on this one because you just made a false statement. Okay. The courts are not the final arbiter of who wins federal election contests. Congress is. That is required by the United States Constitution. That is required by the United States Code for congressmen and senators and the president. So don't be surprised that courts don't usurp the power that is authorized the United States Congress.
Let me just quote the GOP commissioner in Wisconsin in the Wall Street Journal today, printed, and I will read it verbatim. He said, "There is no evidence that election fraud is the reason Trump lost in Wisconsin, and that is not for lack of looking. His advice to your party is to pivot away from these conspiracy theories, focus on the issue that affects Wisconsin families and their pocketbooks." Sir, I want to move on to January 6th.
Okay, then look at the judge's opinion. Look at the judge's opinion in Pennsylvania that talked about over 2 million illegal ballots cast. That was their court order. Look at the special investigation of a former Wisconsin Supreme Court justice who found significant voter fraud at nursing homes in the state of Wisconsin. Look at the 2,000 Mules documentary that has come out. Look at how many mass mail-out of ballots there were across the United States for which we have no security.
Okay, and that has been looked at and fact-checked by multiple outlets, including Reuters, who have debunked that as any sort of proof that there was widespread voter fraud.
I'm sorry, but other people have fact-checked it and find you absolutely wrong, Sandra, but keep going with that story if you wish.
Okay, thank you, sir. Respectfully, I want to move on to January 6th and the committee. Have you been subpoenaed? Have you been served a subpoena, as it has been confirmed 4 other Republican congressmen have?
I don't know if the committee has issued a subpoena or not, okay, because I haven't been privy to any conversations with them. All I hear are media reports, but I can say for a fact that I have not been served with any kind of documentation, and there is no subpoena until it's been served on the person to whom it is directed.
Okay, and you have signaled this week that you're not going to comply unless certain conditions are met, including testifying in public. Should we expect to, if you are indeed served or have been served, to see you testifying in public before this committee?
Well, I have to get with my colleagues who have been purportedly subpoenaed. At least they say they have been served. I don't know why I haven't, and some of them have. I guess with Kevin McCarthy, he went out of his way to accept service. But I've looked at some of their communications to the Witch Hunt Committee, and I believe that some of their communications have merit. But the things with me that I require is, first, it's got to be public. It's got to be something that you at Fox News can have a camera on so that the American people can see it. No more of this clandestine meeting stuff, secret meeting stuff involving the public's business. No more of these little leakages, okay? It's got to be in public. It's got to be congressman to congressman. It's got to be limited to issues associated with January the 6th, and it has to be after this Senate primary is over with. I don't want this witch hunt committee, Nancy Pelosi, trying to interfere with a Republican primary election for the United States Senate in Alabama.
Congressman, lastly, looking ahead, if you win this runoff, what is the plan to win in November?
Well, I'm going to beat the Democrats. I have a history of beating Democrats like a drum, and I see no reason why this general election in November would be any different. They are socialists, they are dictatorial, they are amoral, they are absolutely the opposite of what we believe in the state of Alabama. My record against Democrats is 14 wins, 0 losses. That's a pretty good record, and I'll defend that against any other comer in this Republican primary. Best I understand, none of the other Republicans running in this race have won even a single election. None of them have ever held public office before. I'm the only one that's ever held public office. I'm the only one who's ever beat the Democrats. And unlike in 2017 when we elected a Democrat to the United States, we read Alabama, if Mo Brooks is the nominee, it ain't happening. And if you want to help, please go to mobrooks.com.
Congressman, thank you very much for joining us today here on Fox News Sunday. It's always good to speak with you. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Very lively.
Okay.